some things do just have to come with time. And at the beginning, you are going to have to force yourself to do things that you don't want to do. And you are going to have this big internal battle of, okay, I really don't feel like getting up and going to the gym today, but I've got to force myself to get there and get through my workout. I've got these goals. I know this is good for me. And I know that this is going to help push me in other areas of my life.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Mind Muscle Connection. I'm Joe Kumzeski with Tyler Weed. We're going to talk about commitment today. And Tyler, I have 2 or 3 points that trying to make this a little bit different than people may consider, because I don't think it's quite the same. When you say, I want to be committed to my diet, or I want to be committed to the process, or I lack commitment, I think there are 2 or 3 different layers or even words that kind of can coexist in that realm. So I went in a direction that may resonate more with certain people, but what do you think when you hear that word, just commitment in our space?
I think, my initial thought is, you go and think of someone who is, I think, your typical Fitspo, right? It's 100% all of the time, eating clean. This is my life. This is all that I do. I think that's where, we initially go. But I think if you kind of go beyond that, I think you see a different type of commitment, or think of a different type of commitment where, someone is committed to this lifestyle, but it is not something that completely defines who they are, or they let it be their only definition of who I am, right? I think there's almost like 2 levels of commitment here that I would start to look at when I kind of think of commitment. Yeah, the initial reaction of the 100% all the time person, and then you step back and go, okay, maybe there's a different type of commitment that will take us further, in the sense of, this isn't all that I am as much as I am committed to this and living this lifestyle and being consistent with it.
Yeah, and that really overlaps well what my first point was, and that is, there's even been research on how steadfast people are. When you look at personality psychology, and you have this realm of commitment or dedication or stick-to-itiveness. And what researchers find is it's very, very physiological and contextual. It's not just psychological. It's not just like, well, I am committed to this. It means so much to me, so I'm not going to deviate. We know, for example, with disinhibition, I talked to a couple of clients just this week who said, I was kind of saving some of my carbs, and I was going to, have a glass of wine or a drink or something. And then I don't know what happened. I just started eating. And somebody who was totally locked into their diet, I'm like, well, biochemically, that's kind of what alcohol does. And if you're not ready, it can knock you off your game. So lack of sleep, stress, and emotional tugs in different directions can all of a sudden take somebody who's just rock solid, and then bam, they don't even know what hit them. So one thing you have to remember is that commitment is a pretty active process. It's not just a trait or a dedication to one thing, but it's always there in the background, and it has to be attended to, I think, for each individual thing that we're trying to apply it to.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that we're talking about this today, because I did a podcast yesterday for Pro Physique, and it was about how a lot of people like to say, well, I don't have the time for this, or I'm just not quite ready for this commitment to fitness, and what they think they have to commit. And we kind of talked about those are gonna look like such different levels for depending on where that person is starting in terms of their level of commitment to this fitness journey. It is going to be different. It is going to be, for the beginner, all we need is 2-3 days a week. Let's do a little bit of tracking here, maybe a little bit of extra activity, and then that's all we need to commit to. And so I think also then being able to talk to that client and go through those different levels of commitment based off their goals, their expectations, what you're telling them they can expect in terms of what am I going to have to commit to this? And so I think you can then almost then set that person up for a lot more success in the sense that they're going about this, thinking about those levels of commitment, and we're not pushing them to a point where they're just not ready to commit X amount, right? And that's something that we have to find. So it's almost like, the physiological, biological can start to build on each other, as we just start off with the quote unquote simplest thing, although that might challenge that person just enough. Kind of like you had mentioned in an email to me a couple early this week about, it just kind of made me think you have to give that person enough to challenge them. But if we push them beyond that point, they're going to fall off. And so it's really finding that mid ground of commitment where it's hard enough for them to be interested and to be challenged, but not so much where it's going to overwhelm them with where they're at.
It's funny because that was one of my other 2 points as well, is that there's that context dependence where every day your commitment level can be challenged, even in something that you've sworn amazing allegiance to, and you really are dedicated to that one thing. But it can grow over time. Your ability to be committed to something can grow. I think of, for example, every contest season I ever had in my 20 or so years as a competitor and pro, I felt like I learned some tangible lessons about my body and the physiology and the way it applies to my own context. But then I also felt like I just got better at doing the harder work. It very much like training in a gym. And people don't just get stronger and adapt physically, you also adapt mentally in your capacity for pain tolerance and so forth. And so I think it's a really big mistake for people to think that this is black and white. I'm committed or I'm not. Oh, I slipped, therefore I'm not a committed type person. It's like, you build that strength, you build those fortifications, and that should give you, as you said, the ability to challenge yourself with just a little bit more. So if you think it's perfectly all or nothing, I don't know if anybody can ever claim that they are really a truly committed person, because we just have to move that stick a little bit further down the field.
Yeah, I always know when I get a client or someone that tells me I'm just an all or nothing person, I kind of know, okay, I know exactly what we're going to have to be working through is we're going to have to get you out of this mindset where it's like, I have one slip up, I'm fucked. And then, there go the next 3 days of binging or no training or whatever. So yeah, I would agree. It's almost more of a commitment to not be an all or nothing person, because that's almost easier to do, because all of us can go balls to the walls 110% for 7 days, for whatever, right? 2, 3, 4 weeks. But at some point, we are going to hit a patch in life where it's going to knock us off our game, and it is going to cause us to look at ourselves in a way where it's like, oh, maybe I'm not that committed. Look how, easy I gave up when life just threw me this. And it's definitely necessarily not that. It's just, we need, again, I think we've said this so many times, is we need to learn to be able to kind of ebb and flow with the fluctuations of life and those levels of a commitment. Doesn't mean that you're not committed, but it means that you understand that, hey, like, this is just going to be a different level of commitment at this point, right? I just came off of 8 weeks of not tracking like any food whatsoever. For 2 months, I didn't want that level of commitment. But eventually, because I have done it for so long, the desire came back. I wanted to kind of get back into it again, kind of felt a little bit refreshed. And now I'm ready to have a higher level of commitment, because I wasn't tracking. So I was like, why am I trying to force myself? I just know I'm not going to do it. So why try and force myself? I feel guilty because at the end of the day, I'm like, I didn't track. I should track. No, I'm just going to be okay. I'm going to step back. I'm still going to keep an eye on things. I'm still going to pay attention, but I'm going to take one less commitment. Eventually, I'll be ready to do that again, which happened.
Yeah, you're leading into areas where I think it gets super hard for people. We talk about this a lot as well, to be so multidimensional. It's not like, oh, here's the answer, let's apply it and we're done. So you have these things we're talking about that are conceptually abstract in terms of you can develop different levels of commitment. You can feel more resolute at certain times, and physiologically and psychologically things will test that, can grow over time. But you can also still build this character trait. Like I think of things that I'm so committed to now, some ideal or idea or thing in my life, and 10 years ago, it may have not even been on the radar. And yet now it has grown into this massive part of my being. And it makes me think of the moralistic research that has been done. And you kind of made it sound that way. You were heading in this direction that, I can be 100% committed. And then it's like, oh, wait a second, something came up this week. I got to dial it back. Doesn't mean I'm not a committed person. I just can't pay attention to it this much. If I'm used to getting this much out of my week, maybe just a week of neutrality is okay because I need to do other things. This again, it's like, okay, well, what's the answer? What's, I'm tuning in to try and figure out how to be committed. It's the one thing that can really help you, and this was part of me learning to be more committed, is that in functional MRIs, where they're looking at somebody's brain in real time and they're testing, well, I'm sure we've mentioned this in our podcast before, who's going to make the right decision, who's going to stay the most committed to their goal. They made the right decision even under stress. It's actually the person who thinks about it less. So the neocortex doesn't light up. There's not a lot of deliberation like, oh, this is tough. I'm going to stay committed or not. It's more in the limbic system where they just instantly say yes or no, whatever that right answer was to that temptation that was testing their commitment. Because what happened was they internalized it to a point where they were just that person who was committed to that thing. And so it didn't even register as a decision. It just was an emotional response. I don't do that. I do this. And that makes it sound like it can get over closer to the black and white, easier place to be. But I think it's yes, it is, because you're building that strength, you're building those capacities, but at the same time, we never have it. Remember, we're still biological, we're still psychological organisms, and you're going to have those things where it's like you still have to be on guard and make sure you're applying your commitment where and how intensely you want.
Yeah, and I really like that you brought that up, and I'm pretty sure, yeah, we've definitely talked about that in previous podcasts. But what I've been able, kind of once I learned that, I found learning new things or pushing my my uncomfortability, my commitment, almost got easier, because it's like, well, now that you understand the science of, okay, well, you know what, this is just not an automatic response for me yet. But I know the more I make this choice, guess what? The more and more it's going to become that automatic response. And so I've even found that just knowing that, it's allowed me to make the choice of, when I don't feel like doing something, to kind of still push through that, because I know eventually the more and more I can do that, the more and more it's going to become automatic. So some things do just have to come with time. And at the beginning, you are going to have to force yourself to do things that you don't want to do. And you are going to have this big internal battle of, okay, I really don't feel like getting up and going to the gym today, but I've got to force myself to get there and get through my workout. I had to do that many, many times over the years, where it's like, I walk into the gym and the very first thing I wanted to do was walk right back out. But it was like, no, I've got these goals. I know this is good for me. And I know that this is going to help push me in other areas of my life where, hey, I've had this feeling before. I know that I can push through it. I know that, it can become an automatic process. And I would say at this point now, close to 10 years of like serious training, it very much has become an automatic response for the most part over the last kind of 12 months for myself. So some things you just have to be patient, but you have to, I think, have that knowledge and that understanding. If you can continue to do it and push through, it's going to get easier, and it's going to become more of that auto response for yourself.
And I think, coming full circle back to some of our opening remarks, You almost have to come back to definitions. What is even commitment and how is it applied? Because if it is this all or nothing, I'm never going to break ideal, then you're probably in the wrong ballpark. But if you understand that that resoluteness does have some finite tendencies, and you can apply that kind of intensity for a certain amount of time toward just very small, maybe just one thing at a time. I think of all of my clients who have just totally knocked it out of the park. Like they just make it look easy. They hit their goals, whether it's a physique sport endeavor. One of my clients just crossed the 150-pound mark in total weight loss in a straight shot. I'm like, wow, like,
Yeah.
how can somebody be that committed
Awesome.
for a year and a half and just never break stride? There's just nothing that ever seemed to hinder that person. And I think, well, this was the most important thing to her at that moment. I mean, this was really her getting her life back, and something that monumental made that choice much easier than it might for other people. So a commitment to something that's that grave or that important to you is going to make a difference. And so I think it begs the question, how many things can I be committed to with a lot of intensity? And the answer is not a lot. Like you really have to make sure you've got the time to nurture that committed goal.
Yes, context of goal is really going to determine that level of commitment. And kind of coming back to as a coach, talking to our clients, and then even clients to reaching out to us, you really have to kind of understand how important is this goal, because different goals are going to have different levels of commitment. If your goal is to be a natural bodybuilder that wins worlds, well, that's going to look a lot different in levels of commitment than someone who wants to drop 40 pounds but still have a life, right? Like, or what I mean by a life, going out for dinner, that kind of stuff. So I think also as well, being able to discern how much you are willing to commit and understanding the realistic expectations of what that level is going to look like to reach X goal. Because I think, man, that's gonna start you off right on the right path. If I tell you you've got to do X, Y, and Z, and first thing you go is, I don't know if I could do that. Okay, guess what? This is maybe not the goal that we thought we wanted. Maybe we need to look at something a little bit different that is going to reflect your commitment levels. Not to say that those aren't going to change as we go along, but maybe at this point, a different goal is going to be better. And what that's just then us going to allow us to do is to build off that more motivation, more commitment. And then again, we can kind of have that rise that we were talking about.
Yeah, I don't want to start a whole nother topic, but that almost pushes into just making sure the goals are segmented and kind of smaller. When a client hires me for just an ongoing annual deal, we're doing off-season pre-contest year after year. I get a little nervous that can I keep up a certain level of intensity? Are they going to get bored? You get into some of those off season. It's like, I don't know if I'm doing enough, or because it's just, there's not a lot of that burning intensity when you're 2 months away from a contest or within a couple pounds. And I have a new client who did this, hired me for an entire year. We had the full off season. And I mean, through the off season, there was just massive intensity and focus on progress. And then we had the perfect setup for contest prep. She did a contest. She's doing another one this weekend. And in that entire year, she's just a pro waiting to happen, one of the best physiques you'll ever see. But her tenacity and the hard work and the focus she has maintained for a full year is stunning. And then I asked her, just as we were preparing for this contest, about the next couple that she had planned potentially. She said, nope, I'm out. I'm done. Like, I am ready for a break. And I thought that is a perfect answer. Somebody who could put that much focus and commitment into something, you definitely have to have a break at some point or you will break. And so that's when you have to know how to throttle back and recharge and refocus what you're going to spend those commitment resources on.
For every reaction, there's going to be an equal and opposite reaction. And I always try and talk to people about that when they're wanting to push or talk about, maybe more extreme levels of dieting. It's okay, but guess what? There is going to be this rebound. And that was a perfect example. Anything in life, you put that much commitment into it, you are going to burn out. And you are going to have to be prepared for that blowback, that feedback where your body goes, hey, we got to go back this way now to level back out. And I think it's just such a great argument for just not being that all or nothing person, and being able to, shift your levels of commitment on different things, based off of just even day to day and how things are going, and really understanding your own biofeedback, your own body, who you are and where you're at. Every single day might be different. And so being able to just make those adjustments on a daily basis is just going to allow for that, the most consistency and the most commitment over time, because you're always at the risk of burning out. But if you're able to really gauge that truthfully with yourself, you're really going to be able to get a lot more mileage out of a year of doing stuff and pursuing whatever, passion that you might have. Like it's going to help a lot, because you're never going to have that giant blowback where you got to go deload for 3 weeks and not, not look at anybody, not do anything. I think the emotional highs and lows can be that much more aggressive. I've certainly gone through a lot of that in my life. And so, really being able to find that spot where you're never too high, never too low, super hard. And we're always, I think, no matter what, you're always going to be too high at some point and too low. But again, having that consistency of being in that, operating within that middle, man, if you can attain that, kind of the earth is your oyster or whatever. The world is your oyster. Is that the saying? Or what is the saying?
Now you threw me.
Okay.
Well, I think you're close.
I'm somewhat, yeah, it's the Canadian version.
There you go. But no, I agree. You have to know when to grind and you have to know when to coast. And that's not that the definition of commitment includes both. It's not one or the other. So appreciate that, Tyler. And for you guys who watch and listen, we will see you next time in the Mind Muscle Connection.